1, 2, 3.
While our weekly shows are edited to time for broadcast on public TV and community radio, we offer to our members and podcast subscribers the full uncut conversation. The following is from our episode featuring renowned actor, writer, and director Liev Schreiber in an exclusive interview with Laura, where they discuss his recently released full-length documentary, Meeting Zelenskyy, in which he sits down with Ukraine's embattled leader. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our member supporters.
The award-winning actor, director, and writer Liev Schreiber, heralded by the New York Times as the finest American theater actor of his generation, is known for his stirring Broadway performances in plays like Glengarry Glen Ross, Talk Radio, and Doubt, and television shows like Ray Donovan, leading 7 seasons of the acclaimed Showtime drama, earning 5 Golden Globe and 3 Emmy nominations. Schreiber also starred in and executive produced Ray Donovan, the movie, and recently played opposite Nicole Kidman in The Perfect Couple. You may have seen him in films, too, such as Spotlight, The Manchurian Candidate, X-Men Origins Wolverine, and many others. What you may not know is that he is also a prominent and committed activist. Most notably, Schreiber has been active on behalf of the nation of Ukraine, which is currently locked in a multi-year existential battle against the invading forces of Russia and its dictator Vladimir Putin. Recently, Schreiber had the opportunity to interview the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, as part of a new documentary titled Meeting Zelenskyy. The film is a fascinating portrait of Ukraine's embattled leader and showcases rare footage of Zelensky's early days as an actor, director, and writer, as well as a major entrepreneur who founded and led one of Eastern Europe's largest media companies, making 40 feature films and creating highly popular TV shows, including one that's been called Ukraine's Saturday Night Live. The film also charts Zelensky's surprising rise to power following another of his hit shows called Servant of the People, in which he portrayed a disgruntled high school teacher whose sharp criticisms of his country's leaders result in his upset election as president. Life imitated art. In a few moments, we'll talk with Liev Schreiber about his encounter with Zelenskyy, how and why he got involved in the film, what the Ukrainian leader is like behind the scenes, and what hopes and fears Schreiber has for Ukraine as it enters perhaps the most perilous part of its battle to maintain its sovereignty in the face of overwhelming pressure. But first, here is a clip from the film Meeting Zelenskyy.
On the morning of February 24th, 2022, Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Russian troops are now 20 miles outside of the capital.
It's going to be extremely difficult for the Ukrainian military to defend from this.
The world's second-largest military superpower had just declared war on a country it once swore to protect. As missiles indiscriminately destroyed homes and infrastructure, millions of women and children fled the country, while men of all ages and vocations lined up to defend their homeland against impossible odds. For those of us watching from the comfort of our couches, things weren't looking good for Ukraine. Pundits and prognosticators were predicting that Kyiv would fall within the week.
As we've been warning for months, Kyiv falling is a real possibility.
But on day 2 of the invasion, on the street just outside the president's office, something remarkable happened.
Good evening, everybody. The president is here. We are all here. Our military is here. All citizens are here.
His message was simple. I am here. We are here. But the sentiment it evoked struck a nerve not just in Ukraine, but with millions of people around the world, who in the face of increasingly authoritarian regimes were now seeing that it was possible to face down bullies, that this was the function of a democracy.
Liev Schreiber, what a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for your work over the years and on this film. It truly was, for me anyway, revelatory. For you, I understand it was somewhat personal. How so?
It's been a circuitous journey to my involvement with Ukraine. I know that people have a bunch of different versions, so I'll tell my version. I made a film in 2005 called "Everything Is Illuminated," which is an adaptation of Jonathan Safran Foer's book "Everything Is Illuminated." It was actually an adaptation of a short story that he'd run in the New Yorker. And during that time, part of the reason that I wanted to make that film was because I have great grandparents and one grandparent that are from the region. And so I did a little tour of Ukraine trying to find my grandfather's village and wrote a film about an American who goes to Ukraine to find his heritage. And of course, then read Jonathan's book and thought that was much better and asked him if he would let me adapt it. And I adapted that and made the film. So when the war broke out in 2022, a lot of people were calling me, assuming that I had some connection or would know how they could help. And I was disappointed that I didn't. I didn't know what to do and I didn't know how we could help. And so I called some friends who spent some time in the space. Jason Cohn, who's a former director of Doctors Without Borders, and Michael Goldfarb, and Murphy Poindexter, and we looked at how we could help and what people could do if they wanted to help. And we decided after reading Humanitarian Outcomes Report that year that the best use of money, if donations was the way to help, was to localize aid. So we started something called Blue Check Ukraine, and the model there was that we would use a large international law firm, Ropes and Gray, who's been very generous with their donating pro bono for the past 3 years, to vet and verify the organizations that we would identify on the ground. And I'm very proud of our partners in Ukraine. You know, we've been able to deliver well above 90 cents on the dollar. We've been able to get relief and aid to people in as fast as 2 or 3 days. And it really is, in my estimation, the best way to help if you want to quickly.
Not just your estimation either. I understand you were called out for appreciation by the president himself, Zelensky, that is.
Well, I was very shocked to get the call from one of his aides that he wanted to meet. First, we met by Zoom. And at that time, he was putting together his fund, United 24, which was he was essentially trying to do the same sort of work that we were trying to do, but internally for people who wanted to donate to the fund that he was creating. It had sort of three columns in it. It had a military aid fund, it had a medical aid fund, and it had a what's the word?
Psychological relief?
No, it was a rebuilding.
Oh, reconstruction.
Reconstruction. And at that time, because of our 501c, I got to talk with him on Zoom first, which was very exciting for me because I'm at that point I was a really big admirer of his, and I still am. But I felt that after the initial invasion and the brutality and the horror of it for those of us who were watching it in the safety of our couches at home, that to see a ground war in Eastern Europe in our time just seemed barbaric and insane. And I think that our perception of the scale of Russia's military and what that meant for Ukraine was inevitably not good. And to see him and his team the next morning saying, "We are here," was an incredibly inspirational and powerful message. I mean, most pundits thought that this war wouldn't last a week, that the Russians would take Kiev in a matter of days. And of course, here we are, nearly 3 years later. So, when I got that call, I was really excited. I met him. We spoke briefly. Of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I can't help but think this guy's an actor, and he's a good one. He knows that this has to be Henry V now, and it has to be real, and that's where this this sense of character and courage and spirit that I think was really inspiring to me, came from. I then went to get our work going at Blue Check. I went to Ukraine to identify partners for us to work with, because part of our idea is local aid. So we have to find people on the ground who are doing the work so that we can get the money directly to them and verify them and vet them and set them up in our system. And on that trip, I got to meet the president, and we talked about me being an ambassador for United 24. At the time, because of our 501c3 status, I couldn't be involved in anything that involved military spending or anything like that, or defense. And so he carved out a niche for me in the United 24, which was medical aid, and that was the beginning of our relationship.
So you can see why you, as you put it, jumped at the chance to make a film that involved you sitting with him closely and talking over time. Here's another clip from meeting Zelenskyy.
My maternal grandparents were Ukrainian, so when a group of friends asked me to help them start an organization that would fast-track humanitarian aid and support to Ukraine, it was easy to say yes.
How are you?
I was invited to sit down with the president and discuss how else we might be able to help. After our first meeting, the actor in me couldn't help but wonder if the actor in him hadn't played some small role in his extraordinary response to Putin's aggression. Who was this former comedian from a small steel town in southern Ukraine who seemed so ready and willing to face down impossible odds? What were the elements that shaped him, and how had he and his fellow Ukrainians risen to meet this incredible moment? When the opportunity arose to speak with him at length,
one of the questions I have for you, Liev, is what were you curious about? You've mentioned this idea of him as an actor, but what else were you curious about as you prepared to meet with him for this extended conversation on camera?
I don't want to diminish this president to just being an actor, but if given the chance, I want to promote actors here a little bit. But
we had very set kind of stereotypes of who he was in the U.S., or maybe we didn't even have enough information to have a very good stereotype. But certainly it does seem as if, we in the U.S. and maybe Putin and certainly people in the White House might have had Zelenskyy wrong, thinking he was, quote unquote, just an actor, just a comedian, elected kind of by chance.
I guess that's, a good actor is so much more than a performer. A good actor is someone who is able to see a narrative and see themselves as one of the favorite things that anyone ever said to me was when I got into Yale, Lloyd Richards, who was running the program at the time, because we all thought we were a really big deal because we were 14 actors chosen out of some incredible number, and we were really high on ourselves. And the first thing Lloyd said to us was, I want you to understand that you are the instruments of the playwright, and that's your purpose. And that threw me into this idea that has been very useful to me as an actor and as a director and as a writer and as a producer, that we play a part in a larger story that has some import and some substance. And that if you're doing your part properly, you're filling in a small piece of a larger element. And there are very few actors who really think like that. And it's a valuable way to think about oneself and to relate to something bigger and substantive that in fact doesn't belong to you. The performance is really not about you at all. It's an idea for the audience that ultimately returns something to themselves. And that's what I think a great actor does. And if you, after I, spent some time researching President Zelensky's work and what he accomplished, not just as an actor, but as a social satirist, a comedian, a writer, a producer, and then ultimately the head of a very large media company that was creating content for Ukrainians, specifically for Ukraine. his skills were extraordinary. I felt, first of all, as a satirist and as a writer and as an improviser, and his fearlessness in that world was with the Quartal Quartal 92, I think it's called, was his group. Um, I mean, this was a group that could openly criticize the Russian government, and they would enjoy it. They would brought them to Moscow. And as they became more and more successful, the president made this critical choice to return to Ukraine and to build his career and world there, which for me was a kind of a testament to his intention and who he was, and the kind of content that he developed over the next few years, I think was extraordinary, and really about developing Ukrainian culture and political identity.
Your film shows us so clearly his sense of responsibility, first to his family, agreeing to study math because his father was a math teacher, agreeing to study law because that's what his mother wanted, then deciding he wanted to do something more fun, making the kind of impression in the cultural world that you've described. And then you're right, this incredible decision where he could have been successful, possibly, maybe, in Moscow as a manager, but instead returns home. And he says clearly in the film, because we're getting all our content from Russia, I want to make something that's Ukrainian. There is a stark moment where we see in this footage from your film, meeting Zelenskyy, how brave he was, even as he's saying, we didn't know how brave we were because nobody had done this before. He was brave. Is there a particular instance of that that stands out to you? Because you bring us some startling ones in the film.
I think my favorite footage in the film is the interview with the First Lady and how candid she was about how upset she was with him, first of all, for running for president, and secondly, for what they would have to endure once Russia invaded. But her support and her strength and their courage as a couple and their openness in this documentary, particularly her vulnerability to show her humanity in those really, really terrifying moments. I mean, at the point that I'd interviewed her, I think there had been 12 assassination attempts on the president, who jokes about them, but they were all very serious assassination attempts. It's just extraordinary to see how a human beings stand up to tyranny. And for me, as someone who had spent the past 8 years of my life on a television show with two, at that time, two, now three young children, I wanted them, this was never about Ukraine for me. This was always about American values and democracy and what it is and where it comes from and what it means. And I don't think that those values and those principles are on display anywhere more clearly than in Ukraine.
So elaborate on that a little. You indicate at the beginning that there was something about that pushback that was not anticipated, that was counter to all of the punditry in that early days of February 2022, that gave us a glimpse, us in this country and everywhere around the world, a glimpse of the possibility of standing up to authoritarianism, to a bully, to facing down a bully. And I couldn't help but think that that was a message to us in the U.S.
Absolutely. I think since the fall of the Soviet Union and perestroika, after all of that, after the Budapest Memorandum, the Ukrainians have done their best to develop their economy, to develop their culture. And one of the things that I think is extraordinary about the president, and that I hope is clear from the film, is that he was on a kind of laser-focused search for Ukrainian identity from the very beginning with his work. And I think that satirical sense, that satire and that politically driven comedy that he was interested in doing, which was really poking at authoritarianism and tyranny, was not only dangerous, but because it was so brilliant and funny, very successful. And it gave Ukrainians a sense of confidence in themselves, in their own culture, in their own language, in their own literature, in their own economy, and in their own politics. and they started to thrive. There were a series of setbacks. I mean, the model is that their model was the former Soviet Socialist Republic, and so corruption and all of that was something that took a really long time to weed out. There were certainly many presidents who owed loyalty to Moscow, and they've worked through that, and they worked over and over again until finally they had gotten to a place. I think, after Maidan, I think where they had said, where we really have established ourselves and we want to be a part of the European Union, we want to be a part of NATO. And I think that represented obviously a major threat to Putin. And I that trajectory of that man, from an artist to a politician to an extraordinary inspirational leader, for me, he was always on the same trajectory. Um, and so now we're in a situation where, given our current administration, we're not as clearly behind Ukraine as we used to be. And so the need for aid and the need for support is more urgent than ever. The bigger point, sorry, to get back to your question, is how this represents democracy to me. And it's the principles that I think built this country. That's the principles this country was founded on, to separate from tyranny, to develop our own political, economic, social structure, language, religion, everything, and to fight for our independence, and to fight for it together as a democracy, as a unified community. It's black and white there. Because our democracy has suffered this kind of polarizing journey of the past 30 years, where it's become a kind of competition, and we've forgotten what our values are, and we've forgotten what our two parties are supposed to stand for, and the fact that there could be more if we needed them or if we wanted them. Is something that I think when people look at the film, and I think that people will look at what's happening in Ukraine, hopefully it reminds them of our own democracy and why we need to respect it and do maintenance on it and be a part of it. And
that being said, how did you react to that performance in the White House when Donald Trump basically grilled President Zelenskyy, raked him over the coals for all to see in public?
It was a display for me, like so many things that our administration does right now. They are for the base, and they are to consolidate power, and they're a show. I mean, I think that's so much of Trump's background is reality television, and I think he's brought that to the White House. But having said that, I was very impressed with how the president handled himself.
The other one.
President Zelenskyy handled himself. He wasn't going to back down from misinformation or disinformation. And the first thing that set him off were the false numbers. And he had to say, I'm sorry, but those numbers are just not correct. And you can't be telling. He understands the influence and the power of a democracy. You can't be telling the people things that aren't true. And he reacted. And I think that unfortunately our administration took a very defensive posture and made some unfortunate choices in how they treated a leader of an incredibly important country.
You do see in the film and in what you've just said a different kind of leadership in Zelenskyy. I mean, no one's perfect, I'm sure, but even in the sketch comedy era, where the clips that you show in the film show the audience reaction, you see that what he's doing on stage is kind of, as you say, kind of empowering the audience. They're giggling. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he said that. I'm so glad that footage exists. It's a different kind of leadership, empowering people, encouraging people, I think, as he says in the film, to be real and to connect in a real way to one another and themselves and their choices. I would love to reflect on this moment where it seems as if Zelenskyy and his administration and his people have pulled off an extraordinary military feat, one that has involved and required all sorts of ingenuity and creative thinking. I'm talking about Operation Spider's Web, which, as we're speaking, is really just resonating globally as a new model of war, where pilotless smart drones manage to make attacks deep inside Russia, taking out, 41 bombers, or at least causing damage to 41 bombers and 5 military bases and billions of dollars of damage without the kind of massive technology we think of, but instead with nimble, creative, smart weapons. I don't know what the future holds, but this does seem to be an extraordinary moment.
It is. I think there's a misconception in this country that the Ukrainian military is less than perhaps we think they are, or we're led to believe that they are less than they actually are. I think one only needs to look at how long they've been able to defend their territory and the effective operations that they've had. Spiderweb is an extraordinary example. And the resilience and the tenacity and the strength. And, it's one of those things that you can't help but sort of see in these kind of archetypal ways that
very David and Goliath.
Yeah, but it's the strength of truth. And that from the beginning, I felt I've always felt optimistic about this because they are on the side of truth. And that's the kind of thing that you can cover briefly, but it always comes out. It always surfaces. And it's also the kind of thing that builds morale, it builds courage, it builds principle. And I think that they have that on their side, where the Russian military is struggling, and to be honest, from my perspective and my visits and my time there, they were on the ropes. There's a wonderful story by Sarah A. Topol in the New York Times called "The Deserter," and she's a journalist, and she spent some time with some officers who had deserted from the Russian military. And the perspective that they give on the condition of the Russian military machine and is really shocking, and it kind of gives you some perspective on how the Ukrainians have been able to withstand the Russian invasion, which is primarily the really awful stuff is the missiles and the artillery. On the ground, the Ukrainians have done a tremendous job of defending their territory. But again, they're struggling with conscription and having enough soldiers.
It makes me think the U.S. has really never told the truth about the nature of the Russian military, or before that, the Soviet threat, because we needed to pump them up in image, at least, to justify some of our own military spending. I mean, this has been a long cycle. While we're talking about the current moment, it should be remembered that there are continuing attacks by the Russians on infrastructure, on domestic facilities of healthcare and culture and education, you name it. The situation isn't rosy. You talked about the humanitarian work you were doing at the beginning. Where does that stand now, even as we talk about the overused word, but resilience of the Ukrainian people?
Well, the attacks are actually increasingly urgent and brutal, as you would expect after an operation like that. The need for humanitarian aid is really essential, especially in vulnerable communities. Obviously, most of the men are serving in the military, so we've got a lot of women and children and elderly people who really need shoring up. We work at Blue Check. We work with organizations like Starenki. One of the interesting things about Ukrainian culture that I found when I visited is that the old people are very tough, and they're very defiant, and they don't want to move. So you have these situations where the men go off to fight war, the women and children, particularly in war zones, head to the big cities like Lviv or Kyiv, where it's relatively safer. And then you have these elderly people who refuse to leave their goat or their farm or their cat or whatever it is that they don't want to leave. And their attitudes are like, I'm already 80. Well, I don't care if they drop a missile on my head at this point. I'm not going anywhere. And so there's this wonderful organization that we work with called Starenki, who goes out to them and visits them periodically. They bring them food, they bring them warming kits, they have tea parties for them, they get them together, they give them a sense of community, they bring them medications. And there's a number of organizations that are doing that kind of work. KidSave is another one. It's really a horrible time to be trying to raise a child. KidSave is also runs several orphanages in Ukraine, but they also have these activities for parents and children. They educate children on mines and IEDs to keep them safe. They give them safety backpacks. They have activities and ways to get them together because obviously many of the schools and a lot of the infrastructure has been destroyed. So most kids are learning online, but KidSafe makes an effort to have these kids come together and give them some sense of community. There's it's really important, at least to me, and hopefully to my kids, that we understand the brutality of a situation like this one, and that we care and that we want to do something, and that in so many ways, to me, that's what it is to be American, and because we are a nation that was built by. I like to say we're a nation of grandchildren, that we're a nation of people who were built by people who had come from somewhere else and profited by the freedoms and the liberties and the opportunities that they found here to make the lives better for their children. And to me, that's an essential component of our character and our democracy.
We've certainly been a nation always of people who had courage, many of us. Some of us here by choice, some not, but courage to try to invest in this place and make it better. I wonder, I couldn't possibly ask you, how this experience has made your professional life deeper or richer or more empathic. I can't think of a more empathic actor. But has it changed you in any way? And what do you think will come of this experience in what you do next?
I don't know. I mean, everything changes me. Well, that's the great thing about being an actor, or every person I meet influences me, and to have spent the time that I've spent with those people, the president, his wife, our partners in Ukraine, the people who are doing the work, and to see how selflessly they do what they do. Um, uh, uh, Yolanta Prashalik is a woman who runs an orchestra in Lviv. And I went there and I was, filming a video because what I do is I would come home with the videos, I'd show them to people, and I would do that to raise money. And I asked Yolanta, I said, if you could say anything to Americans who are thinking about supporting Ukraine, what would you say? And she sort of, I wish I could show you that clip. Maybe I'll get them to send you that clip because it's extraordinary. She looks into the corner of the room, and then I can see tears welling in her eyes. And she says, well, in Ukrainian, she says, if the war hasn't moved them, I really don't know what to say to them. All I know is to tell them to hold the people that they love close to them. And it just knocked me over the how how perfectly stated that was, that this was a person who was in an existential situation. And in an existential situation, all that really matters is love. All that really matters are the people that matter to you. Tell them that you love them, hold them close to you. And it was such a powerful moment for me, a realization, because we usually don't get those until we're on death's door. You know what I mean? But here's a country of people who have had some knocks. And it's been extraordinary to meet them and to see how they have responded. And I consider myself incredibly lucky and honored to know them.
We'll close with President Zelensky's own thoughts on freedom and the fight he's in and why. Here's another clip from Meeting Zelenskyy with Liev Schreiber.
No matter how much I love the United States, which I have visited many times, it's very cool. The people are cool and very free, very democratic. But I will never be as free as the American people who live there and are free there. My place is here. I was born here. I feel it. I think we are fighting for this, for the place where we were born. We just want to be here and stay here. This is freedom, to be where you want to be.
There's something beautiful in what you just said. I wish you all the luck, and it was a real honor to speak to you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Дуже дякую. Дякую вам за все.
And coming out of that, Liev, all that remains for me really is to ask you the question I ask all our guests, which is, what do you think is the story the future will tell of this moment? What do you think the future, I don't know, 25, 50, 100 years will say about us now?
I don't know. I think that's in the hands of our children, and I think they're going to write that story, and I'm looking forward to reading, watching, hearing it.
Well, I guess if they get to write it and you get to read it, watch it, hear it, it's got to be a better story than a terrible story, if you know what I mean.
I hope so.
It's got to be better rather than worse.
I'll tell you, having had some interactions with some Ukrainian kids, I know it will be.
Beautiful. Liev Schreiber, thank you so much. The film is Meeting Zelenskyy. We've got more information at our website. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Really good. Fabulous.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to the full conversation with renowned actor, writer, and director Liev Schreiber in an exclusive interview with Laura, where they discussed his recently released full-length documentary, Meeting Zelenskyy, in which he sits down with Ukraine's embattled leader. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our member supporters. Please join our members now by making a one-time donation or by making it monthly. Go to patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends. That's also where you'll find more information on this conversation in the episode notes. That's patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends. And thanks again to all our member supporters.